All right. Just going to give one more second to make sure that everybody manages to make your way into this piece, which is fantastic. Welcome to our ABSI Connect Good Online Facilitation Tools and Techniques for Social Innovators. This is definitely exciting to be able to have everybody be here for this. I can see we've got about 50 participants in the room so far, which is really exciting. Yeah, so we'll get started. My name is Babs Weber, and I'll be kind of a bit of a facilitator for this session. This is something that we started because of a question that I'd had from one of our local innovators in Alberta, who had said, you know, I'm good at facilitation. I know how to really get connection in a room, but I struggle with being able to bring people into that space when I am online. And so wouldn't it be great to be able to talk to some of the people who have been able to do online facilitation for a long time, who can really help us get more into being able to do that work and how we can switch around and do things from a digital perspective. So when I heard that question, I asked it around some people I know through Social Innovation Canada, and we came up with 3 fabulous people who I'll introduce in a minute about how we can try and do some online innovation work and make it really work with a big sort of piece and a big audience. So this is not going to be something that's too terribly formal. This is really meant to be a tips and a tricks, and I'm assuming that because you found this course and you were interested in its energy, that means that you're somebody who already does a lot of this work. So this is really going to try and help give some big principles and some techniques, and then be able to be a Q&A sort of a session, which I'm really excited by. And I'm definitely looking forward to learning as much as everyone else. So just a little bit of a piece to make sure everybody can be aware that if you look at the bar where all of your kind of tools are for Zoom, there is a chat box in there. So Elise Martinowski, who's our digital information designer for ABSI Connect, will be helping us make sure that we keep track of what's happening in the chat and that we can make sure that those questions get added to our Q&A. Elise was also going to put in a Google Doc that we kind of created last minute when we really realized that we started to get a bit of a broader reach for who was doing what in signing up in this, because we were really interested to hear how you heard of us and what sort of cool innovation things you've heard of and are doing, that we can kind of see what's going on with that. So that'll be shared in the chat quite quickly, so you can kind of add in some information and follow along with that. And then in the meantime, to really start this off, I wanted to do something that I know some of you folks are not from Canada, but this is something that we do when we start off, is really acknowledge the land that we're on. All of our facilitators are in Canada, where we exist because our ancestors agreed to treaties that did not cede Indigenous territory, but shared it with us as settlers, as long as the grass grows and the sun shines. These places have been gathering grounds since the beginning of the time that people started to tell stories. So we want to acknowledge this fact, because that's a stepping stone to honor our broken treaty relationships on Turtle Island here. And that's first and foremost some of the most important work that we do in gathering. So I did also want to spend a little bit of time just quickly introducing our presenters as well. So we've got Matt Meyer, who is a practitioner of helping people and organizations step into a higher potential. He's very passionate about organizing people and processes in unique ways that leverage the power of diverse people and perspectives so as to be more into the 21st century, which is why he was a great match to be able to work with digital spaces, since he's been doing it for years. So you can find him through the Arete Initiative, which is a Calgary-based team of designers, strategists, and skilled facilitators. I love it how I was worried about saying the word Arete, but I really messed up on strategists. So there you have it. I also want to introduce Jill Andres. So she is a participatory process designer, a facilitator, an educator, and a coach. She has over 2 decades of experience supporting diverse stakeholders from private, public, and nonprofit sectors in order to create meaningful change and amplify their impact through strategy and social enterprise, as well as running some social innovation labs that address complex challenges ranging from urban homelessness to rural resiliency. So she's designed and taught courses at the post-secondary level on social innovation and systems change, and has been sought out to present on these topics internationally as well. As someone who appreciates the intersection of theory and practice, Jill is also pursuing her Doctor of Social Sciences at Royal Roads University, focusing on the complex real-world challenges facing our organizations and communities. And she lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And then that also brings us to Chloe Waratini. We're kind of going west to east with our panelists. Chloe is a designer, strategist, and collaboration geek from New Zealand who moved to Montreal in 2017. She loves the field building work she gets to participate in with the Canadian Systems Changers in her role as a network animator with Social Innovation Canada. When not on the job, she's dancing, hosting authentic connection events and retreats, talking to plants, making crazy tasty things in the kitchen. So that is a bit of an introduction to the folks who'll be guiding us on this journey today. And really leads us into, I'm gonna kind of open the floor to you guys with some questions that I have about principles for good online facilitation. So, I mean, really one of the big things that's been sitting with me since really the beginning of our COVID times was, why is it that we find a whole day of digital meetings awful, but really enjoy, you know, a weekend of binging Tiger King? So I kind of wanted to get into what's same and what's different about digital facilitation and collaboration. So Jill, I'm going to start with asking you, what is the same that you see in these two spaces?
Yeah, thanks, Babs. So amazing to see so many familiar faces and new ones too on this call. What's the same? Well, the work we're trying to do is the same. So when things shut down for COVID, it didn't change the need for the work that those of us on this call are still trying to do. So really, it's the how shifts. And so we still have a need for a meaningful connection with one another. We still have a need to build trust in communities. We still have a need to be thinking in systems and be bringing in different parts of the system to the conversations and the dialogue that we're having. I could go on, but there are a lot of things that remain the same.
Awesome. Did either of our other presenters want to jump in with some of the things that you think are really important that maybe haven't been highlighted yet? No, that sounds good. Well, then I'll ask kind of my second question. We really wanted to zip through our principles a bit quickly, and then we can get into a little bit of show and tell and then your questions. So this is fine. Matt, I just wanted to ask you about what might be frustrating if you really do work the same way online as you would try and do in person.
Where do I begin, Babs?
No, I only really told you that I was going to throw this question at you about 10 minutes ago.
I'm just kidding. There's just so many things that we can probably all relate to in these very unusual settings. So hello to everyone. As Babs alluded to, I'm Matt Mayer. I join you all from Treaty 7, based here in Calgary. There are so many things as I was prepping for this, I have so many bullet points. And so anyways, I'll start by just sharing a few. One of the things that I think personally is frustrating for me, and I think when I say frustrating, it just means it's an invitation to dig into this work more. Like when I say it's frustrating for me, it's a learning opportunity, it's a learning edge for me, and at the same time, possibly for us, if you're at the same part of your learning journey as me. And the other thing is that there's a little bit of projection that's at play too. If something's frustrating me, what I love about this question and about the nature of trying to adapt to this work is that it starts to offer leadership lessons for myself. And so basically I wanted to share that up front because what I'm going to share here is a projection of my leadership and where I'm at. So first and foremost, what I really love about doing the nature of systems-oriented and systems change work is the nature of the complex issues that are at play. And usually we're bringing lots of different voices together to express the experiences that can enrich our learning and address the problems that we're working on meaningfully. What I also really appreciate is usually being able to work in a team. And in working specifically in a team, what's been kind of frustrating me in moving online is the ability to have those little mini team huddles. So all of a sudden you're finishing an activity and there's a short break and you're in a room with all these people and there's some wonderful results on the flip chart board or whatever it is. And it often can beg where and how a small team can sense into what's most needed next. In the online environment, I've been finding it really difficult to be able to have those little huddles as a team to figure out where and how we adapt going into the next exercise. How do we reorient? How do we adapt or just keep the design and roll with it, etc. So that's been one thing that's been really challenging for me, and I've had some interesting experiences of trying to design like on the fly in public with all these folks, where it's almost like an improvisational class where the rule is to just say yes and you can never say no, and it's kind of fun and awkward, and at the same time I really do miss those small huddles. Connected to that is being able to pivot quickly. I've been finding that if I kind of track my time and attention that goes into preparing and delivering online facilitation, I found it actually requires more time to prepare, even though we might only be convening for, let's say, a half day or half the time we typically would. And so what goes into that, I think what's underneath that is the need to really be prepared for where the journey might go, because I find it so much more difficult to pivot and adapt on the fly. So I've almost had to roll very close to the agendas that I've designed and try to just make smaller tweaks to those agendas rather than kind of like blow up an exercise, because this, what's really needed in this group is actually quite different. But in order to do it in an online environment, there's a lot of prep that's necessary. I think one of the other things that and maybe this just speaks to my personality, but I really enjoy I make a point when I'm in a session in a room with people to not kind of hover over them. We've all been at like a restaurant where like a server has been like over our shoulder too much or just there too often. And at the same time, just kind of like roaming the room and sensing and listening to some words, not eavesdropping, but just sensing. And in Zoom, which is primarily the tool I've been using, we go into breakout rooms, and it's just so much harder to really get a feel for the energy of the room, the energy, is anybody stuck? Where's the conversation at? Are there ways in which I could better hold space for this whole group? In Zoom, you can actually join some other breakout rooms, and that's one of the features in that tool. However, it's just so awkward if there's a small group of 4 or 5 people and all of a sudden one of the facilitators just bombards in. It totally disrupts the conversation. And so for me, the ability to read the room, oftentimes when I'm in the room, I'll listen to the audio. I'll listen to the audio levels. Like there's a moment where you can hear the sound shift, right? Like the sound in the room shifts and you can just feel it. Like, okay, folks are getting into the deeper stuff now. And it's just so much harder to do that in the online session. So Babs, I mentioned, where do I begin? Those are a few. I've got more, but I'll pause there for now.
I'm sure that we'll get into some more of those as we go through, Matt. Thank you so much. I really wanted to as well. So some of those differences can be frustrating, but some of those differences can be really something that is invigorating into the work that we do as well. So Chloe, I was wondering if you wanted to maybe let us know some more about some of those great positives that you can get from entering into a tech space rather than an in-person sort of space.
Sure. So the lessons that I can share are from a few years of doing a lot of remote work and facilitating online, but particularly in the context of Canada, of how it's been during COVID and doing the work online instead of in person. And also a couple of weeks ago, I was one of the hosts for a social R&D conference online in Canada. We were like, oh, it's supposed to be in Edmonton, but oh, we'll just do it online instead, you know, rather than trying to reschedule it. And it was a really great adventure. We decided not to have speaker and Q&A. We didn't have that at all. We did 4 different participatory processes, and it was a wild time. But the things that's so different about organizing a conference online that's compared to in person is, one, it changes what you can spend money on. So much when you're spending, you're doing stuff, a conference in person, you're having to spend huge amounts of money on like venue, on catering, on travel. And instead we could spend all of that money on people. So we could get lots of diverse hosts coming in and really resourcing them to do that. And we had 15 different storytellers. And we could give them all money, and these are all people working at the grassroots. So we could distribute the money in a really different way, in a way that's actually, like, I feel like benefiting the field in a more direct way than if we were spending it on venue and catering and travel. The other thing is it made some, while not ignoring the digital divide that's really there, it enabled us to be able to do a conference that was bilingual in a way that was much easier in doing interpretation than if you were doing it in person. So we were doing it in French and English, and now we're looking at how we could incorporate other languages as well. You can also do closed captioning so that folks that are deaf can come along, and all these things are like much more seamless and easy to do on the online environment. And the other thing that you can do that's really exciting, we had 140 people on one kind of online whiteboard, all harvesting into the same space. And so unlike, you know, when you're at a regular conference and you have breakout tables and you're scribbling on your flip chart paper, and no one really gets to see that in the conversations that are happening in different places and see the evidence of that. This makes it all kind of visible and transparent, so people can really see the full picture of what's going on, even if they've just been part of their one little breakout room. But the other thing, which is a little bit counterintuitive maybe, but I found that actually this online environment can be really conducive to building trust and intimacy between people really quickly. And I've been like, oh, why is that? And I think it's a few things. One is that during this period, we've all been kind of doing things in our own homes. So one, that creates a sense of like, oh, you see people's living rooms, you see their kids, you see their pets, and it kind of humanizes them in a way. And, but I think the other thing is we feel safe and we feel human while we're in our homes. And that allows us to like bring that aspect of ourselves forward. And the other thing is like often, I know for me as an introvert, when I'm in a new social space or a conference or whatever, and it's very loud and it's very like, whoa, so much going on. That compared to being in a Zoom room, I feel like there's less, somehow it's less vulnerable to like bring my whole self into that space. And so we've had some really incredible moments of like brave conversations and team building and that kind of thing, which I don't know could have happened that quickly if we'd been doing it in person.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Thank you. So what we can do next, just for the interests of time, because I know we want to be able to get to some of those questions. I'm seeing in the chat that there's a lot of questions about who's doing what piece of what platforms are you using. So that was actually our next bit, was to get into some of these tools or techniques. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt. Matt, you have got a few pieces that you'd like to be able to share for tools and techniques and places to take us on a show and tell.
I'll take you on a show and tell, a little zoom into the preparing and delivery world of some of my work. And before I share my screen, one of my other frustrations is at the moment I share my screen, it eliminates the ability for us to see more humans on the tiles, on the kind of Zoom tiles. So I'll just frame this up and quickly say, I think two main things. One is that I'm going to kind of share with you some of the tools that we've used for a project called the Energy Futures Lab. And this is a project, it's gathering people in the province of Alberta in this instance to figure out how we can meaningfully address the question of how we can use our leadership in today's energy system to co-create the energy system that the future requires of us, which is just, and which is climate friendly, and which is et cetera, et cetera. It's a really hard topic, especially in the province of Alberta. It's a very polarizing issue, and we've been working on this for about 5 years or so. The reason why I want to show this to you, why I want to zoom into this example, is for a couple reasons. One is to try to kind of delineate how you can see like some of these things working over time, and how some of these different things I've used have kind of layered on top of each other. So that's the background. I'd be happy to share more about the project. I'd be happy to dive into more of these tools. I see some questions are already coming in about the tools. I'm going to show you Mural, and then also Google Docs, just by way of how we integrate some of the planning into the agenda. So let me share my screen. Oh, the other thing is that this is a zoom into like roughly right work. It's something how I kind of characterize all of what I do and the work that we do in person, etc. So I haven't edited this or polished it to be beautiful or nice. This is what it is for you to see, warts and all kind of thing. Can I do a little tech test to make sure that you can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see the Mural board? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so one of the principles that we haven't, I just quickly alluded to, but which is so critical, is being able to plan in advance really, really well and in a different way. And not just for the facilitators, but also for those that are showing up to the meeting. And so I wanted to show you what we use, or what we've been using in order for folks to show up to the session with a sufficient proficiency with the technology that either they can kind of dive right into some of the basic functionalities. And we now use some of this language. I know it might sound a little off-putting, but we use some of the following language that here's a board here that has a couple little exercises for folks to log into to learn the basic functions of the technology. I'll zoom in a moment. We ask folks, if they've never heard of Mural before or tried it, to take 10 minutes and go in and try these little exercises. The second thing is if that doesn't work, if there's still challenges, then we make a dedicated space to have a technology-based discussion for those that need it before the session. And usually it might be the 30 minutes before the session or what have you, but the key is that what I've found in doing this on various occasions with small groups and really large groups is to be able to not have to do tech testing while we're in the session. Okay, so that's been a really, really big learning for me over the last few months. So I'll just give you a little example. Again, it's not polished, but here, Energy Futures Lab Fellows Technical Test. Please complete the Mural tasks that we'll be using in the workshop. And so Mural kind of works like Google Maps, where you can zoom in and out, but you can see it just gives you a little bit of a sense of navigation, how to move around. You can see people have made boxes and comments and scribbles, and that's great. They're getting used to the tool. And then there's a couple little instructions below. So, knowing how to make a sticky note in this tool is really important usually for how we use it. So, do you like coffee or do you like tea? Right? And so create or select a sticky, type your name, and move it into the box. And so you can kind of see that we've done a little screenshot of the bar on the left-hand side to just show folks how to do that. So it's just a small example of how to get used to the tech. Babs, I mentioned I'd only be 7 minutes, but I might be a little bit longer, kind of given how much I've been chatting. But I think the gist of it is here. What are some basic things you can have folks try before you show up to the session? So that's the first thing. The next thing I wanted to show was very much related to what Chloe was sharing around the ability to harvest and transparently. That has really upped the intention and my game, I can say, with respect to pre-planning what a harvest or what output might look like, so we can build the structure within these tools that can be meaningful for participants. So I'm going to show you two examples. One is something we did. We used the strategic foresight process to go through a multi-workshop series engagement to do scenario planning with over 80 people over the course of multiple workshops and months. And so you can see that, like, if you zoom out, these big boxes correspond to the various workshops. And if you kind of zoom into it, you can imagine like 80 different cursors moving around this document, moving post-it notes and what have you. We ought to have it really organized in advance. And so we've almost used it in this instance to replace slide decks, whereby there's an agenda. We kind of like, these could be kind of seen as some slides where we walk through where we're going with the session. And then we ask folks like a check-in exercise to put their sticky note where they fit on this graph, etc. I'm not going to walk you through the whole workshop, but the idea is we really, not only do we need to know what this exercise is going to be, but we need to figure out how we're going to sufficiently build the time in to design this within the tool. Whereas I would just, during the workshop, I draw a 2x2 and write a couple words. It takes 2 minutes. In this instance, it took quite a bit more time to make it look nice and what have you. So I wanted to kind of then show one more thing before I move on to the next thing. But this here is a place where we had breakout groups work on different things. You can't read it, and that's okay. The idea is you can see it's almost like a grid. It wasn't an open space technology, but different groups went to different areas on this grid, depending on their breakout room. And so each part of it has a different unique ask. And so as we zoom into each area, we ought to be really prepared to make sure that all those folks know exactly what they need in order to have that conversation and kind of work on this together. So in this instance, there's a trend around business beyond profit, and we asked them to put up some responses to some questions. And so other people are working on other areas, but like, I'm going to zoom back out again. It is, especially if you've never used this tool or such online tools before, you could just imagine how lost someone could get in this scene, right? So it's really helpful to be really organized on the output and where people need to go. And that's the next thing I wanted to kind of zoom in on. I found this tool very helpful, this quick links, so you can actually link to different things within the document. So at a minimum, if people get lost, this is another workshop related to the confluence of energy and artificial intelligence, that if folks got lost, they could just zoom out and find where we are on the agenda by way of clicking the place on this area. So for example, if they needed to get into the breakout session that Pong was leading, you just double click. Oh, it's been deleted. So because it's done, there might be a challenge. In this instance with Julie, it would zoom you right into where Julie is. Oh, I'm lost. I'll zoom back out. Where are we again? Signing up for the session for an open space. There it is. So being able to create like a user experience for people to navigate has really kind of bridged some of the challenges. The last thing I wanted to show you was a quick zoom into an agenda, just to show like how much prep has been necessary in order to do this and stick handle some of the tech challenges. So I'm going to zoom in even more. So this is just, I kind of wanted to name two things. First is that it's been so critical to identify roles. Every workshop needs to have somebody that's dedicated to technology. We found it very helpful to have folks in various breakout rooms because we can't roam the room and be there to support folks in the same way. So getting really clear on those roles and having the competency to actually do that has been so important. As well as the tech tests for everyone, but that's another thing. So I'm going to zoom down to another part of this agenda, again, roughly right. So we're kind of going into responding to some how might we questions, called this session Playing in the Solution Space. This is our back-end agenda that we just the facilitation team shared. And what I want, and this is probably common or something, you do something similar to this. In any event, you could, like, this is just identifying what the conversations are going to be. So here we are in this part where people are identifying what they're going to do. And I'm leading this session. I need to think about my screen being shared, right? So I'm sharing my screen. I'm starting a timer. As folks are identifying the conversations they want to host, my colleague Pong is capturing that title in Zoom or in Mural, sorry, on a post-it note. After that, and I'm kind of quarterbacking people sharing their responses. Pong's capturing the title. We wanted to choose some of the top ideas, so it wasn't a pure open space, but wanted to choose some of the top ideas that we're alluding to. So I initiate a voting poll and show people how to do it. My colleague Sonia is at the same time madly creating breakout rooms and sharing the link to Mural for people to access it. It is so clunky if these things if this process is not actually scripted out in this way, at least in my experience. It can be really clunky and very awkward for folks that are on the call, as you know, experiencing these folks stumbling through, which is okay, but the less we can stumble through, I think the better. So Babs, I'm going to pause there. I think I spoke a little bit longer than anticipated, and I'm happy to chat more about this, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. I mean, there's so many different tools out there. It's really easy to geek out and go long. But we're going to pass over to Jill, as she's got some other things that she'd like to share. And then Chloe will kind of fill some more gaps after that. And then we'll get into your questions, folks. Jill, you're up next.
Okay, thanks, Babs. And so I'll echo everything Matt said and kind of move on from that place. I'll share a couple other tools, but what I want to also bring us back to is to really understand who your participants are. And so the work that I do is I facilitate social innovation labs and participatory processes in Western Canada. So I'm going to share a few more specific examples with you and just talking about the types of participants. And it's the same principle as if we were going into a live facilitation. We think about who's in the room, and we don't emphasize, we underemphasize the tools and overemphasize the connection, what it is that we're getting out. So my sense of online facilitation is actually pick a tool. So you might want to try a few out, but don't go crazy on the tools and the technology. Again, I'll share something, but keep in mind who you're designing for. So when Matt was sharing his, for example, that approach wouldn't work with a couple of the groups that I work with. So I'll give you an example. One of the groups that I work with here in Winnipeg, I'm working with a social enterprise here that has works with people who have significant barriers to employment, are often living in poverty, have a criminal justice background in many cases. Some don't actually have access to technology because of their parole conditions, for example. So it really changes how we engage with people. So we want to be thinking also about how we adapt some things that are easy. So it's like being creative with the things in your house. It's the Apollo 13, what number was Apollo? Anyway, Apollo 13, right? And they had to design with whatever it was that they had there and create something with what they had. And so often what we're thinking about is also that. Interestingly enough, I also work with a group on the North Shore that includes mayors, councillors, chief and council, and so on. And when mayors don't have their staff with them in their homes, it also creates a different kind of environment. So light on technology, heavier on some of the other pieces, and just making things really, really user-friendly. So my approach tends to be Zoom Plus. So Zoom seems to be, for whatever reason, the platform that people have adopted most during COVID times. And people can access it for free. People can combine in a place and still be distanced, but access the same screen potentially. So it's about figuring out what is the technology that most people can access, and then using that and upping from there. So I'll give you an example. In the Crow's Nest Pass, we're working with a group of youth on designing around youth sense, belonging, and connectedness to the community. And with the youth, we wanted them on and being participatory. And so we ended up creating murals just using Zoom Annotate. So for those of you who haven't used Zoom Annotate before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, except here's one of those technical difficulties. Perhaps I don't have access to this because I am a participant and not a facilitator. So,
give me 1 second and I'll fix that for you, Jill.
All right, thank you. So what I'm going to show you then, I'll go somewhere else instead first. What I'm going to show you this time is Mural. So I'm going to share screen. And I'm going to go to my desktop, and you will awkwardly see yourselves first until I move over to this and go to here. Can you see my Mural whiteboard? My Mural board? Yeah, okay, great. So as you can see, it's very similar to Miro. So, you know, Matt and their group chose Miro for their work. We've chosen Mural for our work. They're actually very, very similar, but it's what you become comfortable with using. So again, we can pull sticky notes out, we can type on the screen, but what I also like, and what I'll show you that's a little bit different from what Matt showed you, is you don't have to get into the technology. You don't have to be right in it to still be able to see someone's, sort of your facilitator's flip chart, right? So people don't need to have access to Mural in order to be able to still see what's unfolding online. So they just need their Zoom still, and they can see as they would normally be seeing a flip chart, say if you were in a session. So the difference, if they're not actually logged into Mural, is they can't be moving flip charts around. But you've got all kinds of things. You could go to your images, bring pictures in, all kinds of things. The other thing that I love about Mural, so this is my technology of choice. So this is and when I talk about Zoom Plus, my Zoom Plus tends to be Zoom Plus Mural. They've got all kinds of templates. Can you see this 5 Whys worksheet? Did it flip over to that? Yeah, okay, great. So here's one of the templates that they have. Another template is this one. So they've looked all over the internet. They've brought together all of these different tools that you can access and use in your facilitation. So this Innovators Compass is one that I really like, and they've all been attributed. So this is Ella Ben Uri, and so they've been attributed to the person who developed the template, but they're in there for anybody to use. A lot of us like to use personas in our work. There's a personas template. So Matt talked about how it can take quite a while sometimes to develop this. Another one is the round robin. I'll zoom in a little bit. And you can see, you could put your challenge statement up, your proposed solution, have people brainstorming, you're filling in, you're still bringing over all the, whoops, I just popped right out of it, but all of the things you want to be bringing in. These are some examples of the different murals that are of the different templates that are available. There are tons, and they're all available for you and included in Mural. So if I'm going to stop my share just for a second. I'm going to go back to try to share my screen again and see if I can now I can. For whatever reason, it's not allowing me to go to Zoom Annotate, but it is a beautiful, beautiful function. And it's available to all of you, and the facilitator, actually, Babs, do you have Zoom Annotate? Or have you used it before?
I have seen it be used.
Okay.
And so it's a lovely one where you can really have a big shared screen. I was just trying to get Elise to share with you to make it work, but I think Matt Ewan's in the chat, who's a wonderful person to work with, has just said that he thinks the function only works when someone is sharing a screen to be able to then annotate on it.
It is, that's absolutely right. But usually what happens is if the facilitator, here's this example, right? So if the facilitator goes in, all they need to do is go into share screen. When you go into share screen, there'll be a box that will say Zoom Annotate, and you click on that. And at that point, oh, Chloe's put a link in it. Thanks, Chloe. And at that point, what you can do is everybody who would be on this Zoom call would be able to go in together and create murals together. So what we did with the youth, for example, in the Crow's Nest Pass, is we put the challenge question in the middle. We had them come up with ideas around. There's also stamps that you can use then, and they could put hearts around the ideas they liked the most. They were also able to put stars by the things that they thought would have the greatest level of impact within their communities. And then we have this beautiful mural that people have created. You save that, and it automatically saves to your Zoom cloud, and you've got that to use as you go forward. So those are just a couple of tools, but what I really, really, really wanted to drive home is that it doesn't matter whether the technology matters less than the people you're working with. So don't get too excited about trying out a whole bunch of different technology. Try something, work with friends, go back and forth, and figure out who you're designing for and design appropriate to that audience to break down and eliminate as many barriers to their participation as possible before you go in.
So Jill, I made you the host, but I'm wondering if perhaps it's a setting in the back end, like that's something good to look into around the annotate, if it's something that folks have to select before they start the meeting.
It's okay, Elise, thanks. This is one of those situations. I haven't run into this before, but it's one of those things you get online, you have to keep a sense of humor about it and be prepared with a backup for whatever it is that would want to do. So this is one of those examples where we didn't have a technical script. And
we did a little bit of a check-in beforehand, but this is one of the ones that we missed. I just want to make sure that we're mindful of time to make sure that we have a chance to get to a bit of a Q&A. I feel like we've been jumping a little bit in and out as people have asked questions. So Chloe, if you maybe wanted to spend about 5 minutes, if there's something else that you wanted to add that our other hosts haven't, and then we'll be able to really jump into some questions.
So the final piece that I want to bring is not so much about tools, whatever, but it's about how you design a process online that is like conducive to humans and their brains and their bodies and their attention. And I've done a lot of work and training with the Presencing Institute in the past few months, which has like taught me a lot about how to build a kind of living, breathing process online. And so the first thing is to have, like, one of the tools that I'm finding that I'm using a lot in meetings is actually getting people to sit, to like get their eyes away from the screen, and and to journal, actually, with a pen and paper. So often when I'm doing a check-in and the people are arriving, I'll just say, okay, take off all of your notifications that are non-essential for like the next hour, because this distraction thing like fries our brains all the time. Grab a pen and paper, and we're going to do a check-in with ourselves of like, and we just kind of have maybe 5 questions with a minute per question, and it kind of just allows our attention to reset. And so this can be really great either at the start of the meeting to allow people to arrive, or it can be really great at the end of the meeting or the event, to allow them to process their learnings and just land their experience and understand what they're taking away. The other thing is I often have like regular breathe breaks. Like if we're doing an hour session or more than an hour, I take a few minutes, and I often facilitate just a small meditation or breath work for like 3-4 minutes, and allow people to close their eyes or look out the window or at plants or something like that. And that can be really beneficial as well. And just understanding different modes of attention. So going between people listening to someone, to being able to break into a small group and like talk, to being back in a larger group and sharing, or then breaking into pairs. And sometimes it's nice even doing like a paired walk. Like if you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you can have people just switch their phones and do that. And I often like during the week, I try and for each day like have one meeting that I take on the phone and go for a walk outside. And it's like it creates a different quality of connection and attention than if you're sitting looking at each other. The other thing that's been going around a lot, but I would really recommend, is whenever you can, if you're in a meeting, turn off your self view. It's like there's something about seeing yourself on the screen that because we're so attuned to being like very self-conscious, we can often end up paying a lot of attention to ourselves, or part of our attention on ourselves, instead of really connecting with the people that's in front of you. So turning off self-view, keeping on speaker view, so you're really just seeing the person that's speaking and not the whole grid, and only using the grid view, the gallery view, if you're in a small group of people, like a breakout group of people, and you're going to be talking to all of them. All of these things help our brains be less fried and enhance like the sense of like connection and like real conversation. It feels less like we're watching TV and more like we're actually together. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you, Chloe. Well, we've had a couple of questions that have rolled in, which is fantastic. So we've got about 12 minutes left in this time. I want to end right at 1 o'clock, so we're really respectful of people's times today. But a couple of the questions that I've noticed so far that I don't think we've quite mentioned yet. One was whether the recording will be shared. We will be able to share this recording. There's someone in the chat, Michelle Alicia Liama, has flagged up the fact that we were not setting this up to be closed captioned or subtitled. So when we share the recording, I'll make sure that we get a bit of that in before we share the recording. So that's going to be something that'll come up. So thank you for flagging that. Then another question that somebody had was about checking in on your breakout rooms. When we're in person, we like to be able to check in on smaller groups. As a facilitator online, is that possible?
I can share something on that. It's definitely hard because you are kind of blind, and as Matt said before, like it can be really intrusive to just kind of like pop into the breakout rooms. It really disrupts their process. So the two things that I've done to kind of cope with this, well, three things. One is ensure that the process that people are going into in breakout rooms is really simple, is as simple as possible. So, and allow them to just be adults and be in charge of their own conversation, and really like encourage that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is allowing the setting on Zoom so that people can come back to the main session where the facilitators are. It's kind of like behind the curtain. If their breakout session is not feeling good for them, or there's people in there but they're not responding or whatever, so allow them to come back to the main session, and we can patch them through to another breakout room if it's not gelling. And the third thing, I'll just share my screen really quickly, find the right thing, is I'll get to the right tab. Is this the right tab? I don't know what I'm sharing, sorry. What's going on? It's trying to get to Mural. Can you guys see Mural? Because it's like popping to my email. Okay. All right. So these were like, people were in these rooms for like an hour. So it was like, you know, I couldn't go in and see, but what I could see, because these were essentially like conference tables, I could see kind of what was going on in the room by watching what was going on in the Miro board. And if we saw that people were having trouble or different things going on, then we were able to either broadcast a message into the breakout room, or put a little sticky on Miro saying like, if you need help or whatever, just come back into the main room, or send us a message. And that way it's like inviting, saying like the support and everything is there if you need it, but we're trusting you to lead your own experience essentially in that room.
Brilliant, thank you, Chloe. There's been a couple of other questions. Jillian has asked about experiences working with having participants do rapid sketch on online platforms. So if you've got someone trying to do sketching online, how would you, like doing a storyboard or rapid prototyping, rapid sketching, how can you reduce barriers in that online? And I think that also ties in a bit with Joanna's question of what if you have people just calling in rather than having the visual? So what sort of things can we do to really reduce those digital barriers for people?
I can take a stab at that. I think they're two separate pieces.
Yeah.
The rapid sketching, Zoom annotates great for that. When it does work, so that everybody can actually be online. And if you're using Zoom already and people have got onto Zoom, it's very easy to take them through to actually be able to do that. So that's really, really, really easy to do. The second question, Babs, was around, can you repeat the second question?
So there was a question around when you have people who, for reasons, for instance, perhaps they're rural, or for other reasons of just the digital divide, they don't have access to that shared visual space. What else can you do?
Okay, great. Chloe, do you want to go ahead with that? I can see you moving forward.
Yeah, so there's two things that I've done with this. One is like making the recording available afterwards. The second thing is, for some people, when it's been crucial, what I do is send screenshots and email them to them, like in the meeting. Like you can have a tech person that's like doing that, just to like, it requires like extra love and care to be able to do that, but it does help. Yeah.
The other thing I'd add to that is sometimes, so when we're working with rural communities, for example, it's a matter of unstable Wi-Fi. So sometimes people can come on initially and share their video with one another so that they get that face-to-face connection as well, and then just turn off. But it's also part of setting up the norms and the culture. So it's a different culture working in a virtual environment, and we can't take for granted that people know what that is. So there's actually a lot that can happen at the outset of of a workshop or a meeting or what have you in setting up what the norms are. So for example, sometimes people turn off video so that they can work on other projects. And so then there's this sense that, well, the people with the videos on are actually engaged, they're involved, they're really participating, and the people with their videos off are the ones who are doing other projects. And so even it's about that trust building right at the outset and the norm setting right at the outset to say, here's what this means if I turn off my video. Here's what this means. And so also, I know Matt and Chloe were talking about the walks and the pairs, using phone and everybody using phone at certain times can actually also help to get around that.
And to build on that, I think it also starts with the invitation into the workshop itself and starting to try on some of the language. And so I kind of mentioned before, now we ask people to show up, having taken a little Mural, like engage with Mural in this little test-like way. Sometimes we also suggest, hey, we're going to get our hands on. Technical things are different, and it's going to be a little trickier. And in order to create the ripest soil for us, a fertile soil for us to collaborate with one another, we invite you to put your webcams on. And so we even include that in the invitation now. Again, we can't force people to do it, but we can stack the odds in that favor and start to create some of the norms that Jill's alluding to. And then the one other thing I wanted to add on the point of folks calling in, it's been really helpful, especially, this has been especially challenging when there's been breakout rooms, and how we've been trying to kind of be inclusive for everyone is to have one of our team members in the breakout rooms, and that's not always possible, but sometimes there's someone really engaged in our work that we could maybe say, hey, can we put you in a breakout room? And if that's the case, can you make sure all voices are heard? It's really, really tricky because sometimes they can't see the visual, right? So I totally get that, but at least at a minimum to ensure that there's someone that's prompting folks to keep them up to speed at a minimum has been I think the best that we've been able to work on that so far, knowing that it's a big challenge.
Excellent. Well, I think that one of the other things that I'm really seeing, and I've heard from a few people in the chat piece, we've had a good conversation going on about how there's many different reasons why you would turn your camera off and what that means. We've had a lot of kind of conversations having in the sidebar, which leads me up to something that I think some of the people who weren't some of the first group online might have missed. So I'm just going to post it in again. When we started to notice that we had people coming from all over the place onto this chat, we were really curious about why and what you were hoping to get out, and then really what you can try and build together as well. So don't feel like you have to add anything about your contact details to this Google Doc, but we were just curious if there were other questions that you had or connections that you could make into each other as well, if that was something that you were comfortable to be able to share. So we have this Google Doc where if you'd like to be able to answer who you are and what you do, it may be something where if you feel comfortable with putting that name on for others who've been in this session, to be able to contact you and be able to say what it is that you can do to work together. One of the things that Alberta Social Innovation Connect does is we do try to weave networks together. So perhaps somebody who's asked some good questions on the chat, or somebody who seems to have work that works continuously with yours, this is a really awesome place to be able to put some of those pieces together and then perhaps to continue on that conversation. So maybe what we'll do is we'll add a column in to see if you want to be involved in another set of chats. Something like this, or something that's even a bit more participatory, and then we can see if there's no promises, but we can see if there's something that either us or someone who is in the chat group would like to be able to kind of have as a peer mentor place. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there for now with you folks. Thank you very much to Brandy, who just said that this is the best webinar she's attended on this subject. That's really high praise. I know we fell flat in a few places. We should have been a bit more mindful of being available for people who need closed captioning and other sorts of visual aids. And I really wanted to thank, I think it was Michelle who had really highlighted that to us. Thank you so much. We'll make sure that we do that. That was Michelle Alicia Lima, so thank you. And yeah, we will follow up and we'll let you know when we've got this posted online. All right.
Thanks for having us, Babs. Thanks everyone for your great questions.
All right, thanks so much, folks, and have a fantastic